Hello everyone around the world. Welcome to panel 2 of the COP26 side event, Linking Air Quality Management to Climate Change Mitigation. And now we are going to discuss how to maximize synergies on air quality management and climate change mitigation. And to open this panel, let me welcome Marcelo Mena, former Minister of Environment of Chile and World Bank consultant, who will deliver a presentation on best practices to achieve multiple benefits from an integrated clean air and climate perspective. Marcelo, welcome.
Thank you. If you guys could let me share a screen, because I'm going to go with my own slides from my computer. That'd be awesome. I don't have that capability yet. Somebody could, one of the co-hosts could set me up so I could share my slides. That'd be great. There we go. Thank you. And I'll be very brief. And yes. So thank you, and thank you, Sergio, and thank you, Ernesto, also for the invitation. And I just wanted to say how important it is that we bring back the air pollution agenda into the discussion of COP26. I think overall we are losing the opportunities, missing out on multiple opportunities, especially information. Some of the things that we should acknowledge, hopefully everything sounds well, is that today air pollution is one of the biggest sources of non-transmissible disease that actually cause around 7 million deaths per year, and which is actually as many people die from HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, alcohol use, and car accidents combined. So it's a huge source of grief and health impacts, and around 50% of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease risk factors are associated to air pollution, and this is even more so in developing countries, which are more vulnerable to these effects. And we've done substantial gains, so we shouldn't really believe that we're at the worst case in these issues. Beijing, Santiago, Mexico City all have made substantial gains in air quality. Mexico City, Santiago, for example, in the course of around 30 years. In the case of Beijing, maybe around 12, 15 years. But we can do better, and we are doing better, and we must acknowledge that in that context. Continue with WHO. WHO recently updated the guidelines on air, but we have to understand the context in which is this done. Last time we had guidelines from WHO, they were in 2005. And these were not a net zero world. These were old guidelines. And today, if we compare, first off, they go down half. No countries have committed to meet them. And we have 150 countries that have committed to net zero emissions by 2050, but no countries have committed to absolute zero pollution. And this is an opportunity that we must take in the short term. If the Climate and Clean Air Coalition has been working on showing that we can actually make substantial gains and have a fairer shot at meeting 1.5 degree goals, if we include black carbon, methane, and HFC reductions, which are the short-lived climate pollutants, most of that mitigation, most that reduction of increased warming will occur from black carbon and methane. Even though the AR6 report shows slightly lower contributions, there are other incomplete combustion contributors that actually don't really change the story substantially. We saw President Biden announce the methane pledge, which is a substantial progress towards having lower emissions, greenhouse gas effect, and of course, better agricultural waste and fossil fuel production practices. But we should also continue with black carbon, which is actually one of the biggest contributors to increased disease and mortality in multiple effects. So going into some Climate and Clean Air Coalition information, and based on some papers by Clement, we have to see here that most of the sources of black carbon globally are from household energy, from transportation, from agriculture, from industrial production, and waste management. So these are the big numbers we should be tackling. And we see also that the spread of these sources of black carbon change in different places. And this is something that maybe is the reason why we don't take these opportunities. For example, not a lot of people are aware of the big biomass contribution to sources of emissions in the case of developing countries, Africa, for example, in Asia, East Asia, South Asia overall, because the global north isn't really doesn't have a lot of these types of sources of fuel, because in the global south, maybe some places in lower income countries, only energy access is only limited to maybe 30% of electricity, around maybe 10% of clean fuels. Basically, people make fires every day, multiple days with large gender bias issues overall. If we look at the terms of the emissions, based on this environmental agency for Europe, we could look at some of the sources just to get a sense of where things are. In terms of black carbon emissions, you have a lot of per unit of energy with anything that's actually a solid fuel. So coal, biomass emit much more per energy that we get. And also, we also have diesel to be substantially high in terms of the energy that's emitted. But if we look in terms of black carbon, combining the high percentage of black carbon and the mass of PM, we see that the largest sources of black carbon per unit of energy come from biomass burning heaters, coal heaters, and diesel vehicles. So that's where the opportunities lie, mostly on reducing both black carbon and particulate matter emissions. If we continue with this, there's multiple ways to mitigate this, and I'm supporting the World Bank in trying to find clearer ways to integrate these policies and to harness and leverage better opportunities to link health effects and benefits towards more climate action. And so if we look at some of the things that we could do as best practices, of the CCAC document and some of my own contributions based on experience, is that, for example, household heating, and there's a picture of Coyhaique, which is the most polluted city in South America, with around 44 micrograms per cubic meter of annual average PM 2.5 as reference, WHO guideline 5, so this is almost 8 times higher than what the WHO recommends. We could do educational campaigns. We could do overhaul programs to replace dirty cook stoves and heaters with new artifacts. We could promote the drying wood and certify wood sources. That also contributes to reducing the biomass burning related deforestation. We could have housing energy efficiency standards and home insulation retrofit programs, which are very and cost-effective means to reduce energy demand. And so some of the good programs that have been highlighted in this context are, for example, the support that the World Bank is providing to Hebei in China, in which a payment for results loan is linked to direct finance from the government of China with subsidies for new gas-based coal-fired cook stoves, which are much more efficient and clean. For example, the home retrofit programs in Chile, which are upwards of 10,000 projects a year, are linked to wood burning overhaul units that are actually very cost-effective means to reduce pollution. Dirty wood with pellets, kerosene, or even electrical heat pumps and split inverters. Also, we have educational campaigns that really highlight things that we should really acknowledge, that we're using dirty fuels. We are actually having unnecessary pollution in places. And that's why a city like Coyhaique, with a population of 50,000, can have pollution that's higher than a megacity, because these dirty fuels as much as many other sources, and therefore heaters that could pollute as many as multiple millions of cars. Also, in terms of transportation, there's means to reduce this. And some of the ways to reduce pollution are having better emission standards. Should aspire to Euro 6 emission standards, which actually make equivalent emissions in terms of particulate matter with gasoline and diesel, with the installation of particulate filters. But also, we should have vehicle management programs testing vehicles on their emissions annually, as occur in multiple places in Latin America and Asia, and also emissions taxes on car use or car sales or fuel taxes that all contribute to that. So we've seen some research on the World Bank on the benefits of fuel taxes in Mexico and the benefits in reducing air pollution and other greenhouse gases also. In the case of Chile, I just wanted to show you that when we approved the Euro 6 standard, we have a standard under which we could jump to electric vehicles with less of an extent, less of a gap. And so today, since a diesel vehicle costs $100,000 less than an electrical vehicle, but the levels are, as a World Bank study showed, providing direct savings of around $40,000 per year, then the increased capital cost can be covered in the context of a 5 to 10 year contract. And therefore, we have unsubsidized electric buses in Santiago, 1,000 of them, which is the largest fleet outside of China. We also see some other measures that are more draconian, which provide market signals, such as the launch yesterday of around 30 countries committing towards not selling vehicles which use internal combustion engines, which is another means of doing this. Ourselves in Chile, we have these emission tax for Nox and CO2 emissions, which I'll show you the results right away. In the fifth year of this pollution tax, we can see that cars that pay the taxes are actually shifting towards Euro 6 standards in terms of NOx emissions. These are roughly, this is the histogram of accumulated emissions of the 250 to 400,000 cars being sold each year. And you can see that the cars that are exempt from this tax have not changed their emissions at all, whereas the ones that are affected by the tax are actually much cleaner. And that, despite Euro 6 not coming into effect until 2022, it's the de facto emission standard in Chilean cars since 2016. Also, eliminating agricultural burning is another good practice, and you must look at this and multiple benefits, including the fact that this actually has better quality for the soils. The retention of water is better when you don't burn out your organic carbon, when you reduce your fertilizer and pesticide use. And so therefore, measures like no burning or lower tilling practices, or using the agricultural waste for better biofuels, or for feed or bedding, or getting anaerobic digestion could be done. And some of the ways that I've seen done in the San Joaquin Valley Air Quality Management District, or in the South Coast Air Quality Management District in the US, which have inspired the Chilean bans, also ultimately result in complete bans, but you need to do this gradually. But there's no better time than today to start with these measures. In terms of emissions, industrial emissions, one way to do this is having emission taxes, emission standards, or in the case of large emitting sources like brick kilns, promoting better brick production techniques, because these are more efficient, they have better quality control, and they are just overall better practices for industry that still contains a lot of traditional technologies and practices. So I could attest to the fact that the power plant emission standard in Chile, summed by the green taxes, both combined, allowed reducing the particulate matter and also provided the evidence to phase out coal power generation, and I'll speak to that in the last portion of this talk. For example, the particulate matter emissions between 2011 2019 in power plant sector was decreased in more than 80%, while having also having a increased capacity of the power sector from the fossil fuel generation. But also, another example is the emissions tax we had for the agricultural sector. They were not affected by emission standards, right, largely when the tax came to effect. And the large payment that they had to do, roughly between $20,000 and $200,000 per ton of particulate matter, caused a 95% reduction of particulate matter in the sector because of these large taxes. So this is also a facto emission standard, and emission reductions occurred before emission standards were in effect. Finally, waste burning is really important, and my experience on this is that if you do not these sources, if you do not have them on your radar, you will miss out on some that could be done are improving waste collection systems, shut down open dumps and replace landfills and other ones. My experience with this is the case of Mexico. In 2007, Alma Hozik from NCAR puts out a paper showing that open burning in Mexico City can contribute to as much black carbon and particulate matter than fossil fuels, but we had just not measured them and estimated those emissions. And then if we don't estimate those emissions, these are largely overlooked. A lot to do with options, and we must continue blending this best practices with the methane pledge, and this will also bring lower black carbon emissions. But I just wanted to say, for example, in the case of Chilean mitigation, we have a cost curve, a mitigation abatement cost curve, like you saw savings for multiple measures as you would expect. But the power sector itself did a study that showed that if we showed air quality benefits, these are actually even bigger. And so I just wanted to say something, a comment here. In COP, we actually have been overlooking other solutions like the cycling. So if we were to include cycling as a benefit, actually it's the most cost-effective mitigation measure of all. And I just wanted to highlight that we should continue to not overlook the opportunities for these low-cost, inclusive measures to mitigate emissions. When we include the benefits of air pollution into the net zero strategy that Chile has put, we increase the benefits fivefold, and so therefore we save $119 per ton of CO2 removed in the context of net zero pathways. So it's a good thing. But we are far from really addressing this well. As Jane Burston showed in her study yesterday, only 2% of ODS funding, only 1% is actually from towards air pollution management. And so this highlights again that we are really missing out on opportunities to blend what private sector already understands exist. You know, when Lenny was showing her the system in which you're reporting, private sector has to report pollution, private sector has to report CO2. And so therefore, it doesn't, if we're not making the connection, the private sector surely will. Why should we do this integration? I'll just give you an example. Our net zero in Chile benefit to cost ratio is 2-to-1. Our air pollution one is 6-to-1. Integration is 5-to-1. Air pollution regulations can be straw that breaks the camel's back. For example, if we put emission standards and carbon taxes, we actually are accelerating coal phase out. Emission standards close the gap on electric bus costs and therefore accelerate investment. I would also highlight that the maritime sector, with the emission standards they need to meet, will have maybe a straw that breaks the camel's back to go towards green hydrogen. Multiple SDGs could be improved. The political economy actually improves because air pollution action has higher support than climate action. We put a human face to climate action. We are hardly protecting our children's future if we ignore how we threaten them at present. And so that's the picture of Ella Adu Kisi Debra, killed in 2013 from an asthmatic crisis that was attributed to air pollution by the coroner. That this is something that we need to take with a lot more urgency that we are doing so today. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Marcelo, for this insightful and very extensive list of solutions that can address air pollution and climate change simultaneously with multiple benefits you have mentioned. We are going to have time to comment about them and perhaps make some clarifications during the panel. So let me open the panel and first introduce our colleagues today, starting with Rodolfo Lacy, Director for Environment Directorate for the OECD, Zoe Chafe, Technical Lead, Air Quality Program. Excuse me, Zoe, if I am not pronouncing your last name right. Christina Wong, Urban Sustainability Advisor, Green Cities, USAID. Thank you, Christina, for being with us today. Michael Doust, Director, Urban Efficiency and Climate, WRI. And finally, Grzegorz Peszko, Lead Economist, Environment, Natural Resources and Blue Economy of the World Bank. With your contributions, we are going to explore best practices and opportunities to scale integrated cleaner actions for maximizing benefits on climate and health. So please let me start by briefly asking you what your organization or program is doing to maximize synergies between air quality management and climate change mitigation actions. And let me start with Rodolfo. That's the question, Rodolfo.
Thank you very much, Sergio, and thank you for organizing this event that is quite important. Well, we believe at the OECD that the global climate change and air pollution are among the best, the most pressing environmental, societal, and public health challenges of our time. We have undertaken extensive work to quantify both the cost of policy inaction on these challenges, but also the benefits of policy action. The OECD has used its multidisciplinary expertise to produce research, data sets, and policy analysis to identify the opportunities for enhancing synergies between air quality management and climate change mitigation actions. And also now we are addressing more complex analysis. We are starting modeling tipping points and economic consequences of exacerbated climate change problem. We have produced a wide range of analysis to this end. For example, the International Transportation Forum that is part of the OECD reports that under the current conditions, private vehicle ownerships will grow by around 30% over the next 10 years. We can think that all these vehicles will be electric, no pollutions, but we are expecting more public transport systems based on efficient buses and different modes of transportation that we perhaps think that are not polluted. But in our most recent report, Transport Strategies for Net Zero Systems by Design, we found out that approaches to reach net zero targets that focus mostly on improving efficiency via technological solutions and later by buying offsets to balance their emissions, limit our availability to radically cut emissions while improving people's life. Such approaches try to fix systems that are unsustainable by design and of course, miss the opportunity that the redesigning systems can unleash. There are indeed enormous untapped opportunities to harness if we focus our policy efforts on designing systems that improve people's well-being with less energy and less materials, and hence far lower greenhouse gas emissions. Precision farming or protected agriculture, for example, are technological trends that are emerging as a part of this net zero future that will require net zero systems by design. And I can mention also the studies that we did about short-lived climate pollutants. Our recent report, the economic benefits of air quality improvement in Arctic Council countries, identified how reducing black carbon emissions near or and beyond the Arctic could help preserve the local Arctic climate and prevent some global impacts of climate change, including a rise in sea levels, changes in weather patterns, and loss of fish stocks. I think that short-lived climate pollutants are part of the analysis that the OECD is doing now as in regular basis. Later we can talk about more about that.
Thank you very much, Rodolfo. And let me turn it over, Zoe. Zoe, we know that at a great extent, the solution to the climate crisis is in the work that cities should do. To address climate change, but also on air pollution. So if you could tell us what you and C40 are doing on this regard.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sergio. It's great to be here today. So just briefly, C40 is a network of about 100 mayors of the world's leading cities who are working to confront the climate crisis. And so what we've been doing is basically focusing on opportunities to bring air quality into climate action planning. So for the past 2 years, supported by Clean Air Fund and the Wellcome Trust, we've run an initiative called Air Quality and Climate Action Planning, which supports cities to bring this aspect into their climate action planning process. All C40 cities have been going through the climate action planning process over the past few years. And so what we've done to support those cities is to create decision support tools that help to estimate the air quality and health implications of the climate action scenarios and climate action plans that cities are leading themselves. We've chosen a cohort of pilot cities to bring these tools into to see what happens when we analyze the air quality implications of their climate action planning process. We're then able to bring back to the cities a set of actions which have the biggest positive impact on air quality in their city going forward, and provide quantitative information about the pollution-related health benefits that can come from implementing their most ambitious climate action scenarios. Along the way, we've done 2 other things. We've also created a set of strategic recommendations for cities to communicate the specific approaches and actions that can help to best align air quality and climate action, and then also identifying a set of actions that are discouraged because they could have negative effects on air quality. And then just this month, we're releasing a new framework for integrating air quality management into climate action planning, and then also providing guidance for the opposite, how to bring climate action into air quality management. This will describe a 9-step process for bringing those 2 processes together in a more efficient and streamlined way. So I'll talk more about those tools going forward, but I'll stop there for now.
Thank you, Zoe. That's very encouraging. So let me give the floor to Christina Wong. Christina, please tell us about the very important work that USAID is doing on air quality, and also what about the cleaner catalyst?
Thank you, Sergio, and good afternoon, good morning, everyone. First, I just want to thank the World Bank for putting together this really important event on a very important topic on linking air quality management and climate change mitigation. So I did put together a few slides to answer Sergio's question, to provide some visuals and provide everyone a brief introduction on what we're doing at the U.S. Agency for International Development, also known as USAID, on this topic. So the U.S. Agency for International Development we are committed to pursuing equitable and integrated action on air quality and climate change mitigation. Simply, we can no longer afford to address these two dire global crises separately. Success in either truly depends on being able to advance equitable and coordinated action. So what are we doing at USAID? Organizationally, we're trying to bridge the gap and maximize synergies in two primary ways. So first is integrating air quality management into USAID's new climate strategy. And second, we are working hard to try to find ways to scale up joint air quality climate programming across the agency. So next slide. So first, I just wanted to provide everyone a brief overview of our new climate strategy. It's really exciting. We launched our strategy last week at COP26. It's available on our webpage for everyone for public comment until November 24th. And so addressing climate change is a top priority at USAID. It's part of the US government's renewed and strengthened commitment to raising climate ambition to meet the Paris Climate Agreement targets and build climate resilience. But at USAID, we are confronted with the dual challenge of supporting partner countries to meet their immediate and urgent development challenges, in addition, which includes addressing the air pollution and climate crises now, while building the long-term transformative change that we all need to put the world on a more sustainable trajectory. So we're trying to address these complex challenges by building a whole of agency strategy to guide our efforts through 2030. This strategy, we outlined and we've set our most ambitious targets and timelines ever for our agency in terms of reducing global emissions, strengthening people's resilience, mobilizing finance, and working for equity. And some of the core principles for our strategy is really rooted in equity, inclusion, and locally led development. And as we all know, and as all the other speakers have spoken about today, poor air quality is not equally distributed around the world, right? Vulnerable and marginalized communities are disproportionately impacted by the health and economic burdens of polluted air. And so we at USAID, a critical objective for us is being able to advance clean air for all to ensure that we are pursuing equitable and inclusive climate action. Next slide. So air quality programming at USAID is still a relatively new program area for us, but we are quickly learning in order for us to be impactful and to have the most effective impact is that we need to work cross-sectorally and we need to take a people-centered approaches to advance multiple development objectives. And so we currently have a small but growing portfolio of air quality programs across Africa and Asia. Internally, in terms of organizationally, we're working to build internal capacity on joint air quality climate action by working closely with our colleagues in the energy sector, gender, health, to identify ways that we can build those connections to work across multiple development objectives, such as advancing clean transport options, working with health practitioners, building and empowering female air quality champions. And then programmatically, we launched last year our new global flagship program, the Clean Air Catalyst program, which aims to advance equitable clean air solutions. Next slide. So the Clean Air Catalyst is a global consortium of 8 organizations with a broad range of expertise, working across 3 different geographic regions. It's led by the World Resources Institute and the Environmental Defense Fund. It's really exciting in the sense that they're testing a new and innovative approach, really centered on equity and inclusion and regarding air quality management. And it consists of these 3 primary phases. So the first phase is about building source awareness, in which, and Jessica mentioned this in the first panel, on building a shared awareness and understanding amongst local actors on locally relevant pollution sources, and in our program specifically for priority communities in a selected city. Then next, it's conducting a root cause analysis. So after identifying those priority pollution sources grounded in science. It's being able to identify the most effective activities for altering the drivers and enabling conditions of a given emission source in each city. Then the Clean Air Catalyst will select a high impact intervention from the root cause analysis and build a coalition of partners who can collectively enact that intervention to reduce health damaging emissions, impacting priority communities while furthering climate mitigation goals. And that could include the formation of maybe new sustainable finance mechanisms or governance mechanisms regarding electric vehicles or transport options, waste management, et cetera, that we've also learned today about the various pollution sources. So we're still in the early phases of this program. We at Usaid are really excited about learning from this program about how we can pursue integrated air quality and climate action. And hopefully in the years to come, we can build upon this program and have more air quality climate programs in the future. But that's our current state. We're still in the learning phases and in the building phases, but we're really excited that we get to work on this topic. So over to you, Sergio.
Thank you so much, Christina. Michael Doust, I am aware you are here, but please hold until the next question, since Christina has already spoken about the Clean Air Catalyst. And then let me give the floor to Grzegorz Peszko, our colleague from the World Bank, from Lead Economist, Environment, Natural Resource, and Blue Economy. Same question.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, thank you, Sergio. Thank you. Thank you all participants for very insightful and inspiring discussions. So you have heard quite a little bit from my colleagues what the World Bank is doing in the space of air pollution and climate change. And I'd like just to reiterate that, you know, in the bank, we have this comfort of being able to support low and middle income countries in particular with with everything from analytical work, policy dialogue, as well as financing. So we've been financing air quality interventions and climate change mitigation and adaptation interventions a lot. And we are building this experience and track record of integrating these multiple development agendas and you know, this long-term existential threat of climate change together with the more short-term immediate health threat of air pollution. Overall, over the last 20 years, we have invested more than 16 billion US dollars specifically in air pollution related investment programs. Increasingly, we are also engaging and leveraging our development policy lending instruments, which is the instrument where we provide budgetary support in exchange for the specific policy reforms that aim at dealing with air pollution and climate change. We do a lot of analytical work, advisory services, providing technical assistance, build local capacities. And what we see increasingly important in our operations is this building capacity to manage the air pollution and climate change, as well as, you know, biodiversity, ocean pollution, circular economy, plastics, all these environmental challenges in the integrated manner. Because too often, you know, the governments, the global community, as well as, you know, us, sometimes we still think too much in the silo manner, often expecting that whatever we do on air pollution will automatically bring co-benefits to climate change, and whatever we do on climate change will automatically bring co-benefits to air pollution. And so what we are increasingly focusing on is going down to the real problems, understanding what are the root causes of air pollution and climate mitigation in a given country, in a given environment, in a given airshed, and then identify very pragmatic integrated approaches that build on synergies, which are many, especially at the very early stages of dealing with air pollution problem through energy efficiency, through better maintenance, and so forth. But then increasingly to identify very pragmatically where are the tensions between the two agendas and how to manage the trade-offs that are inevitable. I mean, we've heard yesterday from Professor Schindler, today from Marcelo, that actually most of the black carbon pollution is attributed to the biomass burning, which is renewable energy. So the classical climate policy interventions provide incentives actually to increase and not decrease the air pollution problem in the absence of the targeted interventions to deal with air pollution. That's why the example of Chile was so inspiring, so important, because it's the same experience that we've seen in Europe, that really the integrated way means having targeted policies addressing climate change to get jointly implemented and calibrated with targeted policies dealing with air pollution. Carbon taxes plus air pollution standards, air pollution prices. So this is increasing the dialogue that we are engaging in with our countries of operation to be effective in dealing with both problems rather than waiting that somehow magically intervention on one-sided interventions will bring co-benefits to the other problem.
Thank you very much, Grzegorz. And then let me go to the second question. Is what are some of the best practices your institution or program is currently applying or encouraging to achieve multiple benefits from an integrated clean air and climate change approach? Which projects, in which countries? What are the results so far? Let me start again with Rodolfo Lacy.
Oh, thank you, Sergio. Well, to support an integrated approach, we strive to make the case that improving air quality, it would not only reduce health effects or impacts, but it will also result in economic benefits thanks to improvements such as higher labor productivity, lower health expenditures, and higher agricultural productivity. A recent OECD empirical study on European industries shows that public policies to reduce air pollution may already have contributed positively to economic growth in Europe. OECD simulations suggest that reaching the air quality targets required by the European Commission would increase European GDP by 1.25%, with the most polluted countries experience GDP growth up to 3%. Most recently, we have focused in particular, as I was saying, on the benefits derived from adopting an integrated clean air and climate change approach in the transport sector. Our aim is to incentivize governments to consider what are the best and more effective policy mixes to be adopted to achieve the best possible outcomes. We just released a very popular report, non-exhaust particulate emissions from road transport, when we address the problems of the pollution that comes from electric vehicles. And well, in practice, this means that electric vehicles are often exempt from policies to discourage conventional vehicle use, such as congestion charges and tolls. We are tracking 3,600 different economic policies, and these are one of them. So given that electric vehicles emit similar levels of non-exhaust emissions as conventional vehicles, and potentially more PM 2.5, our analysis suggests that electric vehicles should not be exempt from such policies. So policymakers seeking to reduce non-exhaust particulate matter emissions from road transport should therefore reconsider policy approaches that provide blanket support for electric vehicles. And on a similar note, we have also looked at how, through an integrated approach, air quality and greenhouse gas emissions mitigation could be achieved in Kazakhstan, in Northeast Asia. And we can tell you that the switching from very dirty and high sulfur content fuels to a more friendly and less sulfur content fuels will be positive in this area. Those are some examples, but we have more. Let me let me talk later about that.
Thank you so much, Rodolfo. I turn it over to you, so.
Thank you, Sergio. So I'll talk a little bit more about the program I mentioned earlier, which is where we're integrating air quality into the climate action planning process. And at this point, we've worked with about 9 different cities in this program. So we have some lessons learned and best practices to share. Let me just back up a little bit and say that the tool that we've developed is a scoping level tool to help cities that may not have access to complicated air quality modeling systems be able to understand what some of the high level findings might be if they look at their climate action plan and try to prioritize some of the actions they've identified using a lens on air quality and health. And so what we've done is work together with a consortium of different academics and collaborators to come up with a suite of tools that we can work with the cities on. And so basically we can introduce this to a city no matter the level of resources that they have available. We can meet them at the level of capacity that they have within their staff and find a way forward to provide new information to them that hopefully will be useful in bringing all of these different co-benefits together. One of the key things that we found that has propelled our success forward on this project so far is that we place technical advisors in Africa and Latin America who can work directly with the member cities that were enrolled in this cohort. And so through that, we're able to understand better what the specific interests of the cities are, who the point people should be, and identify places for breaking down silos within the city government and helping to start some really productive conversations between parts of the government that might be thinking about air quality and climate change and health in isolation. Another key role for our staff, and especially working together with local contacts, is to translate complex science behind the air quality modeling and epidemiological research into local planning. So when we create teams between C40 staff and local staff, there's a level of trust there where we can bridge the gap between the development of policy tools and then their application in the local decision-making processes. Through this, we've been able to emphasize that air quality is not just a co-benefit of climate change mitigation work. It can actually lead to climate change mitigation. So through identifying some of the key places where we can reframe this and help cities to think about new opportunities to accomplish either their air quality management planning goals or their climate action planning goals, then we can find new ways forward. In terms of specific cities that we've worked in, so far we've seen that across the approximately 9 cities, on average, most cities by 2050, if they implement their ambitious climate change scenarios, they can expect to see between 250 and 1,000 less early deaths from air pollution per year by the year 2050. So we also can show them the effects on PM 2.5 concentrations from the same thing. If they fully implement their ambitious scenarios, then they'll have an effect on PM 2.5. Now, this number varies quite widely across cities for a number of different reasons, including how much of the pollution is produced within the city versus outside. And we found a range of between 1% and 70% reduction of PM 2.5. And this is alongside a 50 to 90% reduction in CO2 equivalent by 2050. Even more specifically, in Buenos Aires, we were able to show that if the city implemented its ambitious climate scenario, they could actually push their PM 2.5 annual average concentration down below 10 micrograms per cubic meter by 2050. Now, when we did the analysis, that would have been below WHO air quality guidelines. Now it would be below, I believe it's interim 4, but not quite meeting the 5 microgram standard that has just been set. In Addis Ababa, the city just released its climate action plan within the past few weeks. And with the support of our team, the action plan has air quality integrated throughout, bringing in some aspects of air quality that are occurring right now, and then projecting forward to 2050. And one of the remarkable things about that experience is that Addis Ababa was actually able to go back and better understand the role of biomass emissions from household cooking and heating and bring that into their emissions inventory in a way that it hadn't been represented before from just a climate lens. So basically bringing in the air quality conversation was able to spotlight some of the effects of different sectors that had not been identified through just the climate action planning process. And so together we've been able to identify some places where there are projects and processes going on, either from the national government level or from the city level, where we can find opportunities to reduce air pollution and also accomplish climate action goals. And then I'll just say to finish that personally, I think one of the more exciting things is that in some cities where there hasn't been any work to develop an air pollution emission inventory before, usually for lack of resources, if the city has been working on a GHG emission inventory, we can use our tools to approximate a PM 2.5 inventory, not a complete inventory, but just to give a sense to the city of what they might look at as their top sources of air pollution. And so in those cases, in a few specific cities, we think that we've really started a new conversation about how to think about reducing air pollution in the city coming out of the climate action planning process. Sergio, back to you.
Thank you so much for this very interesting example, Zoe. And now let me ask Michael, if you could elaborate further about the CAC, the Cleaner Catalyst Program, and the actions that are being taken.
Yes, thank you, Sergio, and hi everyone. I'm going to take a slightly different approach to Zoe and focus more on the process and how we've collaborated than necessarily the city engagement. So I'll expand on the Clean Air Catalyst, which you saw in the video and also in Christina's answer to the first question. And we've adopted a number of features in the design of the program that really drive integration. The program is currently active in India and Indonesia. And whilst the primary goal is reducing the impacts of air pollution on planetary and human health, we've also identified cross-cutting themes on climate, on gender, and on health that are embedded right throughout the program, the results framework, and each have their own goals and working groups. And this ensures climate as well as gender and health, they have their own champions, and they're considered every single stage of the program, from source awareness to root cause analysis and coalition building. We're in year 2 of a 5-year program. So unfortunately, too early to really comment on any results. But I can definitely say that having such combined objectives is driving a really rich debate and discussion amongst the project participants, increasing knowledge and understanding across each other's disciplines to really appreciate the complexity of driving integration and finding the most holistic solutions to some of these challenges. And that's really what we're trying to achieve here. It's a shared awareness, a shared sense of ownership of the combined project goals, so that we're not competing, but collaborating. More broadly within WRI, we've been thinking a lot about how can we structure ourselves internally to best support integration. And we've actually co-located our air quality and climate teams within the same team to advance our ability to support cities to design and deliver integrated solutions. And the same team also has the brief to drive integration across the whole of WRI cities program. So a really big commitment around the structure that advances and encourages collaboration that will hopefully maximize synergies across the board. Back to you, Sergio.
That's very exciting, Michael. Thank you very much. And now let me give the floor again to Christina to ask her the same question, best practices in the broader scope of the USAID work around the world.
Yeah, thanks, Sergio. As I mentioned in our presentation, this is still really a new area for us programmatically at USAID on air quality. Even though we've worked on climate in the past, the level of ambition and whole of agency approach is really at another level for us. So even as an agency on climate, we're really trying to take an integrated approach and a very cross-sectoral approach. So if anyone who looks at our new strategy, it's very different from our previous strategy. It's very cross-cutting. And And we are literally trying to mobilize both our humanitarian assistance as well as our development work, everything to address the climate crisis. But when it comes to air quality and climate in particular, I mean, our team, and I think this is actually what Michael is saying is the same thing, is that we're kind of one and the same. Basically, the folks who are also working on climate now are also the same folks who are very passionate about air quality and addressing the air pollution crisis. So we were trying to build internally a team. This is kind of like we're still at the phase of like a lot of internal building and awareness raising within the agency, amongst our health colleagues, amongst our energy colleagues. I mean, USA, we have a very strong clean energy program and renewable energy program, and it's just raising the awareness also about the air quality co-benefits that come from various clean energy solutions. We're building trying to build we're in the early phases on transportation, unlike the World Bank. And so, we're still in that phase too. So, and then in our Green Cities team, air pollution is playing a prominent role. And so we're really trying to think holistically across the various solutions on circular economy, transport, buildings, in the various sectors to try to advance integrated air quality climate action. But in terms of results, we're still in the early phases, so we don't currently yet have many results. But I think, as Michael was mentioning, the process of thinking in an integrated way and creating these integrated frameworks to try to build out programming has been very productive for us.
That's very exciting, Christina, because it might give us the chance also to provide you with some inputs about the possibilities for the future. And in that sense, I would like to ask Grzegorz same question, but I imagine the World Bank should have a knowledge bank on best practices. So what can you tell us about that?
Yes, so, over 30 years of lending and policy dialogue on air pollution, a little bit less on climate change, but still quite a long history, has gave us a lot of lessons learned. We've seen a lot of good practices, we've seen a lot of bad practices. We've seen what worked, what didn't. For instance, in Mexico, we've been lending and working with the government on the air pollution problems in the Mexico City metropolitan area since the 80s even, and we've lended cumulatively around $3 billion in the kind of the whole series of interventions, of multiple interventions. We've been working on these interventions, adjusting us on a needed basis. And in the end of the day, not just because of the World Bank lending, but Mexico City has achieved remarkable successes in reducing concentration of particulate matter by 70%. Tropospheric ozone concentration went down by 50% in the whole metropolitan area. Because a lot of these interventions were focused on traffic with relatively multiple co-benefits for climate change and air pollution. The air pollution program, air pollution-driven program in Mexico City also had, in the end of the day, a lot of climate co-benefits. In other areas, these co-benefits are not that obvious, and we had to deal more with, dealing with both problems jointly in an integrated way, managing these interventions to prevent solving one problem by aggravating the other, and identifying this, as I said, joint policy interventions that build on synergies, but manage the trade-offs, which I keep stressing are as common as co-benefits in dealing with our pollution problem and climate change. If we just don't acknowledge trade-offs, we can't solve them, and then it will backfire in the end of the day. So, for instance, more recently we've been very privileged to be engaged in both China and India in their air pollution problems and climate change in Hebei province, for instance. We've seen spectacular achievements in terms of reducing population exposure to PM 2.5. The bulk of it was attributed to phasing out coal-based domestic heating and cooking, small city-based and district sources of heating, small coal-based, artisanal sources, small coal power plants. A lot of it was achieved by moving the emissions of air pollutants from the small sources that are close to people's lungs, that contribute a lot to the population exposure, and they are very difficult to control, moving all this pollution to the large coal power and heating plants, where they can be controlled with very effective end-of-the-pipe controls, but also supporting conversion of the electricity system in China to solar and wind-based electricity, which is pollution-free. Because Chinese example is a very interesting one, where between 2008 and now, the sulfur dioxide emissions, which is the main precursors of the most toxic fractions of PM2.5, fell by almost 80%. But at the same time, the usage of coal increased by 50% in the electricity system, and the electricity generation more than doubled in the same period. China has the largest penetration of the sulfur scrubbers in the power system, the higher penetration than anywhere in the US and in Europe, the higher penetration of the NOx removal, complex removal systems. And its power fleet, from the air pollution perspective, is more advanced than European or EU. There are higher emission limit values, and they're actually enforced. But then, it has over time led to the accumulation of this very carbon-intensive power fleet. So this is the kind of dynamic challenge of integrating air pollution and short-term air pollution challenges with the long-term decarbonization pathways, which China is now facing. It's not the only country, but it's probably the most spectacular example. So we've done a lot of investments in Mongolia more recently, and a very active policy dialogue, where again, the main population exposure is due to the household cooking and heating, especially heating using combination of coal and biomass. And often, it means that you want to reduce the use of biomass in the households by connecting to the electricity grid for electric heating, providing gas, providing district heat, which is, and many of the sources use fossil fuels. So again, we have the tensions, but it just means that you need to do more on the mitigation, the climate change mitigation front, and be aware of it, that sometimes it is worth focusing on saving people's health and lives from the acute exposure to air pollution by temporarily increasing the carbon footprint of the entire energy system, just in order to make a more effective long-term carbon development strategy that takes into account that temporary and not huge and manageable trade-offs, but however, trade-offs that must be recognized and managed with explicit interventions and policies. So Martin told you also about the Greater Cairo, how multiple interventions on the stick and carrot side have been developed over time with city authorities. So this is the type of examples where we've been most proud of, and more recently recognizing that this trade-off keep emerging, and we also engaged in much more analytical work that would support the further air pollution and climate change integrated programs, where we use marginal abatement cost models for reducing population exposure to PM2.5 to identify not just the population exposure effects of different combinations of technical measures, but also look at the the impact on climate. And when we identify that there is a synergies, there is a reason to prioritize. If we identify that there are some climate penalties of certain important pollution abatement measures, such as putting this end of the pipe emission controls for air pollution, which increase the greenhouse gas emissions from these installations. So then we go back to authorities and we discuss, how this fits into the long-term decarbonization strategy, how to manage this policy coherence, which we learned a lot from OECD analytical work, that the policy coherence is a very important priority, much more helpful and pragmatic than the co-benefit narrative. So these are the type of examples of a very pragmatic, solution-driven approach that we are taking in the World Bank.
Thanks so much, Grzegorz. Let me move to the next question. And in Mexico, we say that a priority that is not reflected in the budget is not a priority. And let's be clear, air pollution is not a priority in most countries. So this question is about what are your recommendations for mainstreaming, for incorporating integrated cleaner solutions to achieve climate, health, and other sustainable benefits at national and subnational scales. If I would like to remind you about the time, if you can give us a concise answer, please, as concise as possible. Of course, this is a very important subject.
Can I start?
Rodolfo again, please, sorry.
Okay. Well, there is no one size fits all risk for reducing the impacts of air pollution, while also mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, as there are large differences among countries in terms of the prevalent pollutants and sources. Analyzing the sources and causes of particulate and greenhouse gas emissions, for example, in each country, can guide towards the choice of the optimal policy mix. I think that we have to emphasize that we need a policy mix and avoid policies in one sector that is harming another one. A coordinated policy mix among different environmental issues is essential. And this would avoid policy trade-offs, such as achieving renewable energy targets by increasing biomass used for heating while causing an increase in local particulate pollution, for example. In both terms, most economic or effective integrated policy includes, for us, implementing air quality standards, automobile emission standards, fuel quality standards, emission taxes, more efficient use of energy, incentivize the use of clean fuels and remove fossil fuel subsidies, of course, phase out coal and those heavy fuels from the oil and gas industry. The use of newer and environmentally more benign combustion technologies, stricter control of air pollutant emissions, and incentivize or requiring the adoption of best available control technologies. To reduce emissions of greenhouse gases and air pollutant, it is essential to invest in best available technologies. That is our main recommendation.
Thank you so much, Rodolfo. Zoe, please.
Thank you, Sergio. So I have 5 recommendations here, and these come from our new framework, which is called Clean Air, Healthy Planet, a framework for integrating air quality management and climate action planning. So the first one is earlier is better. If you want to integrate clean air solutions and climate action, starting the integration process is good if it happens on the earlier side. Now you can come in at any point, but ideally, if you can start at the beginning of either of those processes, then you can have them in mind as you create the processes going forward. And so that was one of the reasons we actually developed the framework, was to show that if you've already started your climate action planning process, here's how you can bring in air quality. If you've already started the air quality management process, here's how you can bring in climate change. But there are things that are lost along the way and opportunities that exist at the beginning. The second is to evaluate and align emissions inventories. So for example, sources that are important to air quality, as we've been hearing about from many of the speakers today, such as biomass use for household cooking or space heating, may not be included at all in GHG emission inventories because the biomass is considered biogenic or carbon neutral, whatever the term may be. But that's not the case, obviously, from the air quality side. Also, air pollution does not respect political boundaries. So in some cities, a large proportion of the total concentrations may be originated outside of the city borders. It's important to gain an understanding of that early on so that you can manage expectations from cities about how, and here I am focusing on the subnational side, about how much they can reduce their PM 2.5 or other criteria pollutants, and then also help them in identifying sources that are under city control. Building on this, it's important to include dual reduction targets. So for example, integrating air quality and climate action plans, you should include a target on PM 2.5 as well as CO2 equivalent. So if possible, break out other components that are very, very important to both sides of that coin, such as black carbon, and bring those out as a focus so that it provides a case for understanding why this dual action is necessary. Starting cross-agency conversations. I hinted at this before, but there are many opportunities for mainstreaming across planning processes and departments that surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly to those who have been doing this for a while, are not talking to each other. So we found that just the simple process of starting to engage with technical staff on this project led to new conversations. And in our experience, those conversations then led to more ownership and buy-in across the city or the municipality, both in the climate change and the air quality processes. And then lastly, look for opportunities across initiatives. So for example, just within C40, we have a Clean Air Cities Declaration where cities are committing to establishing baseline air pollution levels, identifying the top sources of pollution, and taking ambitious actions on a short time frame. So we can look for opportunities to bring those commitments into the climate action planning process and vice versa. And oftentimes that's not happening unless there's a concerted effort to make it happen. Back to you, Sergio.
Thank you so much. Let me turn over to Christina, please.
Yeah, no, I think Zoe summed it up pretty well. I mean, I think those are, and as well as Rodolfo, I think for us, though, I mean, just in agreement with what was also said earlier about policy coherence, I think that is one of the things that we're quickly learning. I mean, even within our own agency, about, you know, trying to clarify the win-wins, but also being able to think about the air quality consequences on certain potential climate change actions, in order to to avoid trade-offs and to recognize that there could be trade-offs. And so I think that was articulated earlier, and I think that's even something that we're learning internally within as an agency, but as we're supporting our partner governments. I also think, I mean, this is part of what we're trying to do with the Clean Air Catalyst, is building broader coalitions. And so doing integrated air quality climate messaging and showing the joint benefits can potentially lead to broader and more diverse coalitions for both movements, right? And for both issues. So that's something we're also trying to work on with the Clean Air Catalyst. In addition to it, the great list that Zoe mentioned that I was also writing down.
Thank you so much, Christina. So it's your turn, Michael.
Great, thank you. I just want to sort of maybe, kind of build upon what was said already and focus again a bit more on the process. I think it's critical that we better articulate the benefits of integrated action. And I think we still need to demonstrate how integration leads to more and better outcomes. And that's going to be critical in getting political buy-in and increasing project viability. So I think a big emphasis on documenting, collecting data and evidence to articulate the case for integration, to say why an integrated inventory is better than having two separate inventories, how one can lead to another. So really kind of documenting that evidence base, that an action on cycling isn't just about health outcomes, but it's about access to services, about public safety, about greenhouse gas emissions, about economic activity, about jobs, etc. Really to trying to articulate the collective impact of integration, I think is critically important. Secondly, and to make sure we do integration well, and there's coherence in design and implementation, we need to build capacity. Again, this is where I think Zoe's comment around having technical advisors is important. It's to bridge that language of the technical experts with the policy experts, and a city or organization's ability to identify, assess, and manage synergies and trade-offs requires technical expertise. It requires a broad understanding of how complex systems interact, and that needs data, resources, and capacity building. I think that's where we need to focus on supporting cities or other organizations in building up their capacity to manage those synergies and trade-offs. And finally, we need innovation, and not innovation in technology, but innovation in collaboration, in how we work together, how we fund projects, and how we learn and do as organizations. And we need to support organizations to think and operate differently, to align outcomes, to have joint objectives. Again, as Zoe mentioned, combining greenhouse gas targets with black carbon targets. We need to incentivize collaboration. And again, cities who I work with generally do not have this luxury. They're resource constrained, they're time constrained, they have immediate priorities to attend to. And we need to find a way to offer them the space to innovate, to learn how to manage complexity, and to find new ways of thinking, working, and just decision-making to really prioritize integration. I think until we do that, until we really think about the context within which cities operate and other organizations operate, the context in which we're able to bring together different agendas, I think that's going to be critical really to advance collaboration and mainstreaming of multiple policy agendas into the same goals and same programs.
Thank you so much. And then it comes Grzegorz. And I would like also to ask Marcelo Mena to give us a final comment for this panel before the closing remarks. Grzegorz.
Yeah, thank you, Sergio. It's really striking that we have to ask ourselves the question why air pollution is not deserving the same attention as the climate change, because until recently it was the opposite. Yeah, it was us as climate change activists. We were seeking validation for the climate change action by showing the co-benefits to air pollution, the local co-benefits. Now kind of the tables have started, and it's quite ironic how people are kind of shifting erratically their attention instead of focusing on what's real. And the real is that we need integrated approaches to solving multiple problems, and as we have always had as people. So I think that the first step towards this integrated approach and recognition of it is to drop the co-benefit belief system and get real. And get real that we need integration, we need coherence rather than co-benefits. And environmental air pollution and climate change are two distinct environmental problems. Yes, there is overlap between sources, solutions, pollutants, but not necessarily always. We need to recognize that these two externalities require two distinct sets of policy interventions and sets of solutions, however, which need to be integrated because there is a lot of interaction between these policies. So in the World Bank, we have developed this 5 steps approach to the integrated approach to air quality management and climate change, which focuses on, which is driven by the health of the populations. We're driven by the immediate steps needed to improve the population exposure to the most acute air pollution, while at the same time integrating these short-term air quality management measures into long-term decarbonization strategies in order to avoid irreversible investments, for instance, in air pollution that will lock in too much carbon-intensive assets that may be expensive to be stranded later. So we are publishing this integrated approach report paper very soon. It's in the publication process under the title "The Integrated Approach to Climate Change, to Air Pollution and Climate Change, from Co-Benefits to Policy Coherence." And it starts, by in air quality monitoring, identifying most exposed population, these pollution hotspots, then determining the objectives for the most affected airsheds in terms of air quality improvements, and we have now new guidelines from the WHO on it, then attributes sources to that population exposure in these particular hotspots, in these particular airsheds, and we have tools to do it, and then identify the cost-effective set of technical and behavioral measures to achieve quick and very effective improvement of population exposure and health benefits of air quality. And this is the moment where you need to start integrating climate change considerations, because some of these measures may have immediate climate co-benefits. Others may require adjustments to the climate policies and climate interventions. And this is important to identify these synergies and trade-offs between technical measures before we start designing policy instruments. And that's why the Chilean approach, what Marcelo was saying, is so important. I mean, think of joint implementation of climate and air pollution policies, because if you just focus on climate policies, you can make air pollution worse. If you just focus on air pollution policies, you can lock in a lot of carbon intensive assets that will be a problem later in the long-term strategies. So, and that's why we need this integrated approach, precisely because there are as many tensions as synergy. Because if you only have co-benefits, then who would care about integration? I mean, you start from anywhere and do anything, and the problems, both problems will be solved. But it's not the case. That's why we need integrated approaches.
Thank you, Grzegorz. I couldn't agree more with you. And the final comment, concise, is from Marcelo Mena to close this panel.
Yeah, it's great to see all the different approaches, and I really appreciate all the information that's provided by all the participants. I did want to highlight two things that we haven't spoken about. Measurements. In Latin America, around 80% of measurements are in Mexico and in Chile. And we have many cities that have no measurements reported. So we could hardly say that things are working out if we don't measure. And it's hard to say. I'm sorry to say that the global burden of disease and satellite retrievals tend to underestimate pollution. And so you're not going to look at this. And if you look at the map in Africa, it's even worse. Today, we had seminars here at COP on the citizen network that we're putting together in other places, and actually for the first time showing some measurements. And my colleagues in Uganda and Nigeria are also expanding and showing measurements because they can't wait for a government to deploy an official monitoring site. These aren't going to be for official purposes, but they allow us to really get a hold of where we have opportunities to gain. Also, the exposure-based measurements could change the way that we look at pollution and become much less tolerant towards it. So there's some really interesting work that will come up pretty soon with this Alliance for Clean Air. Once Google starts with their AirView project and actually showing, going to jog and having a safe path to jog, because you're going to have just air pollution to reduce. And it makes you, when you see a red spot in the place that you're jogging or where you're taking your children to school, you're going to be becoming much less tolerant towards the air pollution. It's not abstract, it's very local. Finally, the framework under which we do this work exist on air pollution many times when you have air quality standards and when you have measurements and air pollution attainment programs. The framework exists for mandatory emission standards, emissions reporting, and all these things exist. And when you want to do air pollution, it's largely voluntary. Climate change, voluntary. NDCs are voluntary. There's very few countries that have laws that make emissions targets being mandatory. So the thing is, using this framework allows you to use a pre-existing legal mandatory framework that we are largely overlooking. So I think that's probably the most important reason why we should integrate. The framework exists and we can build climate action into it.
Thank you so much, Marcelo, for these great final remarks about this panel. And now I would like to, please don't go, stay there to listen Rodolfo, who is going to provide us with his final remarks about the side event.
Well, thank you very much, Sergio. This twin global crisis of air pollution and climate change requires a comprehensive approach and systemic solutions in those regions, countries, or sectors that are indeed part of the problem, but have a severe health and economic impacts from toxic substances that we are breathing or extreme weather events that we are suffering. The implementation of air pollution policies in combination with a sustained energy transition and the achievement of global climate targets will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and air pollutants simultaneously, bringing significant additional health, environmental, and welfare gains. It is true that keeping warming below 1.5 degrees centigrade this century, it's imperative to halve annual greenhouse gas emissions this decade. And we learned today that controlling short-lived climate pollutants, we can achieve fast results and avoid tipping points that could exacerbate climate impacts with unpredictable consequences, including massive migrations and possible war scenarios. A positive sign from Glasgow is that in the first full draft of the COP26 decision distributed yesterday night by the UK presidency, there is a clear call to consider further opportunities to reduce non-carbon dioxide greenhouse gas emissions, phasing out coal and subsidies for fossil fuels. And we have to go beyond CO2 because it is essential. Talking about the collective impact that Michael mentioned in the last panel regarding the climate pollutants, known practices and existing technologies using actual regulations and enforcement bodies can achieve global reductions at least 40% of methane, up to 70% of black carbon, both by 2030 relative to 2010. And 99% of F-gases by 2050 compared to 2010. Only methane reductions would avoid nearly 0.3 degrees of global warming by 2045. But more than that, because methane is a key ingredient in the formation of ground level ozone, a powerful climate forces and dangerous air pollutant, a 40% reduction of ozone would prevent 260,000 premature deaths or 775,000 asthma-related hospitals visit, 73 million hours of lost labor from extreme heat, and 25 million tons of cross losses annually. And that's the CCAC quote. Let me also quote Marcelo Mena. If I receive a signal from Glasgow well, he said that when we talk about the air pollution nexus with the global warming, we are putting a human face to climate action. And this is important. In the Arctic region, for example, where around 18 million people are living in areas where fine particles concentrations exceed the World Health Organization standards, the air quality improvements could avoid 4 out of 10 air pollution related deaths by mid-century. Taking in account the transboundary angle, as Zoe mentioned in the last panel, we saw today that in Latin America, in MENA countries, or in Central or Northeast Asia countries, regional cooperation needs to complement and not replace strong domestic policies aimed at addressing local sources of air emissions or pollutants. International regulatory cooperation efforts require strong and effective domestic regulation frameworks aligned to the Paris Agreement, the targets, and SDGs. Christina, Wong said, clean air for all is a critical objective for ensuring equitable and inclusive climate action. I cannot be more agree on that. Finally, I would like to stress that meeting the temperature goal of the Paris Agreement will require transformational rather than incremental changes. Efforts to decarbonize the economy and efforts to implement effective command and control policies without limiting the growth in energy and materials demand will reduce emissions per unit via efficiency improvements, but greenhouse gas emissions will increase via growing energy and materials demand. We need integrated approaches and policy coherence, says Grzegorz. We are expecting, yes, we are expecting a new normal, more greener, more bluer after the pandemic, a new policy landscape after the COP26 for the implementation phase of the Paris Agreement. And the nexus between air quality management and climate change action will be crucial to improve the well-being of the population, reduce our vulnerability to the climate futures, but saving lives. We have to save lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rodolfo, and all our speakers and panelists for all these extremely valuable insights and recommendations. Thank you, all the audience. We all together can make our voices heard to make a strong call for action for an integrated and cleaner actions with health, climate, and other benefits. I just want to mention finally that we are going to produce materials from here. You are going to see blogs, and you are going to see other materials. And by the moment, you can watch these videos for each of these sessions at the Methane Moment YouTube channel. In your chat box, you have the website where you can also take and download these videos. Thank you again, and I look forward to keep working with you, coordinating in our work for expanded actions around the world.
See you guys. Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.